Hi, my name is Charlie Kimbell, and I'm the state rep for Woodstock, Reading, and Plymouth, serving in the Vermont legislature. And today I wanted to talk about what's looming in front of us. Last night, a constituent asked me if I could provide a comparison between the governor's proposal for education transformation and what the legislature is doing. And at first I thought, well, it should be simple. And so I started to lay it out on paper, and it became a little more complex. So I thought I would share some of those points today. Hope you don't mind. So first, in the number of school districts for this education transformation bill, the governor suggested 5 school districts based on professional networks of superintendents, really having no basis in size beyond that. But they varied in size from 10,000 to 34,000 students and would be effective July 1st. And then would have 5 member school boards working as part-time employees. Now, the board members would be elected in November of 2026. The House, in a big contrast, proposes to establish a 5-member panel of former Vermont superintendents to propose 3 versions of new school districts. And that's according to historical development, delivery of services, inclusion of career and technical education centers, and consideration of grand list equity. And to make those proposals to the legislature by December of 2025. And then to use really optimal district size according to research of 3,900 students. So that'll likely result in about 11 to 15 districts, not sure yet, and be effective July 1st, 2029. So why so far out? It takes a lot of work in order to set up those new districts, to establish voting wards, to establish voting patterns, and then establish new budgets for the districts. So that's the House position, saying, yes, we agree there should be fewer districts, but not 5, and it's complicated to get there. How about school size? Well, the governor has proposed to have elementary schools of 450 students, and then for 7 to 12 grades, or middle and high school, to have 650 students. So that's what the governor is proposing. The House, in contrast, is saying, okay, for grades 6 through 12, there should be a minimum of 450 students, not the 650. In most places throughout the state, you can't get to that 650. So 450 seems a little more reasonable. And then a waiver for smaller schools that are small by necessity, in quotes, because of geographic isolation. So if it's off in the middle of nowhere, you're not going to be able to hit those minimum school sizes. Class size. So the governor has proposed for grades K through 3, class sizes of 15 students. And then for grades 4 through 12, class sizes of 25. So the House, by contrast, looking out upon the landscape, said, okay, for kindergarten, a maximum of 12, not 15. Grades 1 through 4, 15, we agree. Grades 5 through 12, 18 students. And for multi-age classrooms, limit them to 2 grades per class. And those multi-age classrooms are necessary in some of those smaller schools. And there will be exemptions for some class size for specialty courses like AP classes or career technical education classes. Funding. So the government adopts the foundation formula that was created by APA Consultants, an out-of-state consulting firm based in Colorado, which used the evidence-based approach. That's one approach to coming up with a foundation formula. So the base in that approach is $13,200 per student, based on the costs of operating a prototypical high school or school district of 3,900 kids, with 4 elementary schools of 450 each, and 2 middle schools of 650 each, and 2 high schools of 650 each. So that kind of shows what the prototypical school district would look like under the governor's model. And so the base is adjusted by weights for a number of different factors, with the total expenses resulting in a reduction of $183 million from where we are today. The student-to-staff ratios in this proposal are based on an ideal number of 8.8 students per staff member. What is in reality right now in Vermont is 4.38 students per staff member. We're the lowest in the country. But achieving that higher number would require a reduction of approximately 8,000 staff members in Vermont schools, almost half. So we can't achieve that in a day, don't want to achieve that in a day. So that's a little unrealistic. So the House has taken a different tact. It adopts a foundation formula drafted by Tammy Colby and Bruce Baker, who are experts in education finance. Dr. Colby is from the University of Vermont and uses the education cost function approach, a different way of looking at how to come up with that base figure. It's an update to the study to calculate student weights for tax capacity adjustments in Act 127 back in 2019. But this approach uses the actual 2025 school expenditures and then uses a regression analysis to estimate what we should be spending per student in order to achieve state standards or state desired outcomes. The base in this case is $15,033 per student, and it is adjusted by similar weights to account for things like economic disadvantage, English language learners, and disabilities. The formula contains small school grants for those schools which are small by necessity, and also for those in sparsely populated areas. The initial estimates using this cost function approach results actually in a 2% increase in expenses, and that's based on the current state of education configuration. It isn't until later years where you're instituting different cost-saving measures where you're going to be able to reduce that expense. Tuition for independent schools in this new formula are limited to what that base plus the weights comes up with. So no longer announced tuition rates being paid by the public schools. Spending over base, here's a difference. So in some cases, the base in the eyes of the school district may not be enough. So how do you deal with that? Well, the governor came up with an idea of creating a school district approved spending. So that is where a district would look at how much they wanted to raise as a certain percentage above the cap, a certain percentage above the financing formula with a cap built into it. So, and it's part of it, he proposed a state guarantee payment. So the districts with a grand list per pupil amount that was below the median would receive financial support from the state to equal the percentage below the median that they are. And that state guarantee payment will be financed by the education property tax across all property taxpayers in the state. The House came up with a different approach, and that creates this supplemental district spending by district, limited to 10% over the education opportunity payment. The districts would approve that supplemental district spending in a vote of the taxpayers that is the same as the poor school district as measured by the grand list per pupil, with any excess funds going to a reserve for state aid for school construction. School construction, something that is certainly of interest in the Woodstock area. The sources of revenue. The governor proposes to retain the current mix of revenue between property taxes, sales and use taxes, purchase and use taxes, a portion of the rooms and meals tax, the lottery. But proposes to come up with a new homestead exemption, which is easier to administer than the current very complex property tax credit system, in which it makes almost impossible to figure out what your property tax bill is. We like the idea of coming up with a simpler system. The one that the governor's come up with stays within the existing tax expenditure of $153 million. That means the amount of the property tax credit right now is $153 million across the state. The governor said, we're going to come up with a simpler formula, but keep that amount the same. Hope that makes sense. The House wanted to take a different approach. Yes, to come up with a House homestead exemption, so it'd be easier to administer and easier to understand. But one of the things that's in the governor's proposal is the existing income brackets at 47,000 and 90,000, 115,000. Those brackets, at least the 47 and 90, were set in 1997. They haven't been adjusted since then. And it creates some weird cliffs inside of this property tax credits currently situated. So we try to even it out and take out those cliffs so that it's more of a curve in which someone would be able to earn a tax credit. So, or a property homestead exemption. So the House proposal is to provide a homestead exemption on your primary home as long as your income is under $115,000, starting with a base of, I think it's a 90% exemption if your house, if your income is under $25,000. Pretty significant, with no cap on it. And then it goes all the way up to, it then lowers itself up to zero at $115,000 in income. But still, it's applied against the value of your homestead. It's pretty significant. So that proposal is not limited to the $153 million that's currently being paid out as a tax credit. It does add to what needs to be paid out from property taxes, and that's one of the things that we're going to have to address in the legislature is it worth it? School choice. So the governor creates school choice schools for grades 9 through 12, giving students the ability to apply to public and independent schools that meet the criteria, subject to a lottery if the school is oversubscribed. So there's no limit on the number of school choice schools, but a school does have to designate at least one if a student wants to attend a different school. The House establishes a different system, and that is a criteria for independent schools to receive tuition dollars, meaning that 51% of the students who are in attendance at that school have to be publicly funded, bringing money from a school district in the state. And it must meet minimum class sizes that we talked about earlier, and allows tuition for public schools in Vermont and in the bordering states, but does not allow independent schools outside of the state of Vermont. So that's a big change as to how to use that school choice. Two last things. One is rulemaking authority. The governor is really proposing to move most rulemaking authority from the State Board of Education to the Agency of Education. And maybe this is just for policy wonks. But the State Board of Education is an independent body that's supposed to be setting school policy for public education. The Agency of Education is really the agency that executes the policies as set forth by the State Board of Education. Now that State Board has 10 appointed members. They're all appointed by the governor at this point. The House would like to take 2 of those members and have them appointed by the legislature. Instead, not all 10 appointed by the governor, and really give some resources to the State Board of Education to help it carry out its duties. Resources meaning money to help pay for some staffing. The last one is school construction. The governor's proposal is silent on school construction, but no kind of efficiencies can be achieved without building some schools to handle greater numbers of kids. In the House proposal, we are putting in the work of a task group and a working group and a task force that reinstitutes state aid for school construction. It identifies one funding source as that recapture from the supplemental school district spending, but it is also in need of another funding source, and that's asking the governor then, or the Agency of Education, to propose every year what should be in the general fund budget to help with aid for school construction. So there you have it. There's a difference between where the governor is and what the House proposal is likely to be coming out of the House this week. So by mid-April, that proposal will be in the Senate for their consideration. It's really lining up to be a collision course with the governor, but we think in the House that our proposal is better, of course. And we'll see how that sugars off in the next few weeks in the legislative session. But that's where we are. Thanks again for listening. This has been an update from the Vermont Legislature. Thank you.